do you like plugin emulations? Now, this is a conversation I had with someone recently, and we were talking about like plugin emulations, and like I do a lot of comparisons between plugins versus the hardware, and some are relatively close, some are night and day difference. And we had this conversation. The person asked me, like, do you use many plugin emulations of hardware? And I was like, look, I'll be honest, no. And and the reason for that is I've got enough hardware where I don't need to use like the plugin emulation to kind of emulate the hardware, not like it kind of does. But the reason being is that when you look at a plugin emulation, the problem you have with it is it's emulating the hardware. Now, in the analog domain, certain things you're limited with. You can't, like, there's certain things that are in the plugin and digital world that's better than analog. I don't know, frequency analyzers, multiple, all these different features like solo in the band. Like the only piece of hardware you can solo band with is where is it? Over there. The West Audio Tube EQ, like soloing a singular band, and kind of you can isolate the frequency. That's quite an easy thing to do. Well, I don't know if it's easy, but that's something that you see a lot with plugins. And the problem with emulating a piece of hardware, kind of trying to do this one for one, is that you're limiting the functionality of what you could actually do with the plugin. The plugin can have many, many more features, loads more features. But because it's emulating a piece of hardware and trying to emulate it in its feature-wise as well, it's like it then makes the plugin have less features because it wants to emulate the hardware. Whereas if let's say, for instance, I don't know, there's a Michelangelo. Where is it? Over there. Michelangelo, right? So the Michelangelo Tone Projects plugin, that's an emulation, but it has a lot of features added to it that make the plugin really good, features that the hardware doesn't have. So it makes the plugin, it has a lot more features and you can do a lot more with it, which even if they don't sound one for one, you've got all these different feature sets that make it in some ways you could maybe achieve not so much the kind of box tone of it, but you can do a lot more with it. And a plugin like the Better Maker VSPE, it's because it's emulating the hardware, the functionality of what's possible with the piece of with the plugin, the functionality's kind of scaled down to match what the hardware can do because it's an emulation. And this is why I don't particularly like using emulations, because I don't feel that they capture the kind of box tone and the sound of the hardware in too many ways. And I've tested this multiple times and they don't generally do that. But then what you're also adding to it is the limitations of what the hardware can do is now limited in the plugin as well. Whereas, if you had an EQ, for instance, what EQs have we got in here? If you had, I don't know, like an SPL PQ. So if you had the SPL PQ as a piece of hardware and a plugin, and you was to emulate it, which they have on Plugin Alliance, and the plugin's not too bad, but all you have there, if you emulate it identically, is a pretty standard EQ, in the sense that, if you were to then compare that plugin to something like FabFilter Pro-Q4, FabFilter Pro-Q4 can do vast amounts more than the SPL PQ plugin can. And it can create the exact same curves, no doubt, but it can do so much more. And this is the problem that you have with, like, you could create the SPL PQ plugin, try and capture the analog kind of the analog tone and sound of that plugin, of the hardware in the plugin, but then give it a skin that looks like FabFilter Pro-Q4 with a frequency analyzer, with all these different features, soloing bands, and what else could you do with it? You could have mid-side on it. You could have mid-side per band and things like that. So you can, all the vast range of stuff that you can do with Pro-Q4. But then people would argue, well, it's not a plug-in emulation. It doesn't look like it, and it doesn't do all the exact same features as the hardware does. So what you're doing there is you're limiting limiting what the plugin can do for the sake of it to sound like and work, not necessarily sound like, but to work like the hardware. And that's why I don't like using plugin emulations, because I'd much rather use something that gives me a full feature set like Pro-Q4 does, and gives me advancements on what is in the analog world. So you're getting things like spectral dynamics. You can select a node for an EQ band, for instance, and then you can switch it between mid-side, left, right, whatever you want to do with it. You can change the curves to whatever you want. Whereas when you're limited to what the hardware can do, that band is that band. That band, you can maybe turn it into mid or side, but that band is a bell, and it's not a shelf, and you can't ever have it as a shelf. So there's all these sorts of limitations, and that's why I don't particularly like using plugin emulations, because they are in many ways limited in their functionality.